She burned the pregnancy test until the mafia boss read the result, positive, in tears. The air in the Beacon Diner was always thick. It smelled of stale coffee, grease, and the faint sour odor of bleach water. My apron, even fresh from the wash, carried the scent like a permanent stain. I was 25 years old, but in Eastwick, that felt like 40. This part of the city didn't just wear you down, it ground you down, dusting your bones into the cracks in the pavement. I kept my head down. That was the first rule of survival. My feet throbbed against the cracked linoleum, a dull ache that had become my constant companion. I worked the double, from 3 in the afternoon until close, which was usually whenever the last drunk stumbled out. The tips in my apron pocket felt light. $43. Rent was due Friday. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. I wiped down the counter, my reflection staring back at me in the chrome of the napkin dispenser. Tired, my dark hair was pulled back in a tight, functional ponytail. My eyes, which I tried to keep blank, held a story I never told, the story of the foster system, of aging out with nothing but a black trash bag, of learning that invisible was the safest thing to be. Trouble found people who looked up. In Eastwick, Trouble wore cheap suits, carried desperation in its pockets, or flashed blue and red lights. I wanted no part of any of it. I just wanted to pay my electric bill and sleep. It was a Tuesday. Around 9 o'clock at night, the diner was quiet. Just 2 truckers in a corner booth nursing coffee. The bell over the door chimed, but the sound was different. It didn't jingle. It told. The diner went still. The sizzle of the grill felt too loud. 3 men walked in. They didn't belong. They wore suits made of dark wool, tailored so precisely they looked like armor. They cost more than my entire apartment building. The 2 men on the flanks were thick, their necks spilling over their collars, their eyes constantly moving, scanning, assessing. The man in the center was different. He wasn't overly large, but he moved with a weight that seemed to bend the air around him. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if he owned the very ground he stepped on. And in Eastwick, he probably did. Luca Moretti. I didn't need the whispers or the newspaper headlines to know. You felt a man like that. He was the shadow that ran the city, the name spoken in hushed tones. He slid into the booth in my section, the vinyl sighing under his weight. His men took the booth behind him, facing the door. He placed his hands on the table. Clean, strong hands. He looked up, and his eyes found mine. I froze. They weren't just dark. They were old. They were oceans of history I didn't want to swim in. But as I stood there, holding a damp rag, I saw something in them that I recognized, something I saw in my own reflection every morning. Tragedy, a deep, settled sadness that no amount of money or power could erase. I forced my feet to move. I grabbed my notepad. "What can I get you?" My voice was thinner than I wanted. He just watched me for a moment. Coffee, black. "And for you?" I asked, turning to the men behind him. "Steak, rare, both of us." One of them grunted, never looking at me, just the door. I nodded and turned away. Feeling his gaze on my back like a physical weight, I poured his coffee, my hand steadier than I expected. I set it down in front of him. "Thanks," he said. His voice was low, like gravel rolling in velvet. I just nodded and retreated. I was refilling the sugar caddies when Trouble, the kind I knew, made its move. Big Jim, a regular who always smelled like cheap whiskey and bad decisions, slid out of his corner booth. He'd been quiet all night, but now he was weaving. "Hey, sweetheart," he slurred, blocking my path to the kitchen. "When you gonna smile for me, huh? Come on. Camilla, just one little smile." I stepped back, keeping my head down. "Excuse me, Jim, I have work to do." "Nah, I'm talking to you." He reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, his fingers damp. That familiar, cold panic seized my chest. This was the Trouble I knew, the everyday, pathetic, desperate kind. "Please let go, Jim." Just one smile, he insisted, leaning closer. His breath was sour. I tried to pull my arm back, but he tightened his grip. I said, a shadow fell over us. Luca Moretti hadn't left his seat. He hadn't made a sound, but he was there. He was simply looking, not at me. He was looking at Jim's hand wrapped around my arm. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The air in the diner didn't just get cold, it turned to ice. It was a silence so profound, so absolute. It was louder than a scream. Big Jim, drunk as he was, recognized it. He was looking at something that didn't negotiate. He was looking at the end of the line. He released my wrist so fast I stumbled back a step. I was just leaving, Jim stammered, his face pale and sweaty. He fumbled in his pocket, threw a crumpled $10 bill on his table, and practically ran out of the diner, the bell mocking him as he fled. I stood there, rubbing my wrist, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked over at Luca. He was just watching me. That look, it wasn't kind. It wasn't cruel. It was raw. It was understanding. It was a look that bypassed all the walls I'd built and saw the terrified kid in the foster home. It saw the girl who knew how to absorb a blow. My breath hitched. I gave him a small, terrified nod, a gesture of thanks. Then I turned and fled to the kitchen, leaning against the stainless steel counter, trying to breathe. My shift ended at 2 a.m. The rain had started, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the streets of Eastwick, making the trash glitter under the flickering orange streetlights. I clutched my thin jacket tight. The $43 in tips felt like rocks in my pocket. I just wanted my bed. I wanted the 3 deadbolts on my apartment door. I stepped out of the diner's back alley, and my heart stopped. A black sedan was parked across the street. It was gleaming, silent, and predatory. It was the car he had arrived in. I immediately turned to walk the long way home, but the back door opened. Luca Moretti stepped out into the rain. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Camilla. My name, from his mouth, sounded like a summons. I stopped, my back to him. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to run. This was not Big Jim. This was the kind of trouble that swallowed you whole. I don't want any trouble, I whispered to the wet pavement. I'm not offering trouble. He stood by the open car door, the rain darkening the shoulders of his suit. I'm offering a ride. It's cold. I live close, I lied. It was 12 blocks. Just to talk, he said. His voice was patient, which was somehow more frightening. You looked... I recognized something. In the diner. I should have run. I should have walked away and never looked back. But I was so tired. I was tired of being cold, tired of being scared, and tired of being so utterly, profoundly alone. And his eyes, in the dim light, they still held that familiar tragedy. Against every rule I had ever lived by, I turned around. I crossed the street and got into the car. The door closed with a heavy, final thunk. The inside was silent, insulated from the world. It smelled like rich leather and something clean and masculine. We didn't drive toward my neighborhood. We drove out of Eastwick. We headed toward the river, toward the glittering, indifferent skyline of the city's center. The tinted windows turned the world into a blur of wet neon. "Why did you get in?" he asked, his voice low. He wasn't looking at me. He was watching the road. "I don't know," I whispered. It was the honest truth. We drove for an hour, maybe more. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't threatening. It was heavy. It was a silence that waited. "You've been alone for a long time," he said. It wasn't a question. I watched his profile. It was sharp, classic, like a Roman statue, a face made for old money or old sins. Since I was 16, I admitted. The words just came out. Foster care. You age out, they give you a trash bag for your clothes, and the door hits you on the way out. I hadn't told anyone that in years. You learn to keep your head down. You learn to be invisible. He nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something he already knew. We were on a high point now, a dark lookout overlooking the city's sprawl. Invisibility is a good weapon, Munhi said. his voice quiet, "until you realize you want someone to see you." He turned off the engine, plunging us into a deeper quiet. My father. He wasn't a good man. He taught me that the only way to survive is to be the most dangerous thing in the room. He was wrong. He turned to look at me, his face half in shadow. "It just makes you the most lonely." That's what it was. That's what I saw. Not just tragedy, but a loneliness so deep it had become a part of him. My ghosts and his ghosts were circling each other in the dark, speaking a language I didn't understand but felt in my bones. He took me to his penthouse. It was a place of glass and steel. Perched so high it felt like we were floating in the sky. The city lights were a carpet of diamonds below us. It was beautiful, sterile, and empty. It was the physical manifestation of the man who lived there. "Why am I here, Luca?" I asked, standing in the massive, cold entryway. He turned to me. The city lights haloed him, casting his face in shadow. "Because I'm tired of being lonely," he said, echoing his own words. "And I think you are, too." He didn't move toward me, just watched me, giving me the choice. And the tension, the invisible string that had connected us in the diner, pulled tight. It vibrated with a need I hadn't let myself feel in a decade. I was the one who moved first. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the lapel of his suit. My fingers, calloused and rough from bleach water and hot plates, felt out of place on the fine fabric. "This is a mistake," I whispered. My voice was shaky. "I know," he breathed. He didn't grab me, and he didn't pull me in. He just rested his forehead against mine. I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. I could smell the rain on his suit, and for the first time, I couldn't remember the last time, I felt safe. My whole body ached with a different kind of exhaustion, a longing to just stop fighting, to stop surviving, even for a minute. His hand came up, very gently, and his fingers traced my jawline. His thumb brushed over my bottom lip, a touch so light it was barely there. It wasn't a touch of possession, it was one of curiosity, like he was memorizing a face he shouldn't be looking at. When his lips finally met mine, it wasn't a spark, it was a slow burn. It was hesitant and desperate all at once. It tasted of his black coffee and the deep, raw longing of two people who had been starving for a connection they didn't believe they deserved. We moved from the entryway to the bedroom in a slow, stumbling embrace. His expensive jacket came off, dropping to the marble floor. My thin, damp coat followed. It was a shedding of armor. In the dim light of the bedroom, with the city sleeping far below, we weren't the mafia boss and the waitress. We were just two damaged people, clinging to each other in the dark. He laid me down on the bed. The sheets felt like cool water. They were silk. My clothes were threadbare cotton. The contrast, the impossible softness against my rough life, made me want to cry. He looked down at me, his dark eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't name. It was more than desire. It was vulnerability. He was giving me one last chance to run, to go back to being invisible. I reached up and pulled him down. The intimacy that followed was a quiet, desperate collision. It was a search for comfort in a world that offered none. It was the friction of two broken pieces trying to fit together, trying to find a moment of solace. It was the whisper of skin against skin, the tangle of limbs, the shared, ragged breaths. It was the feeling of finally being held by someone who understood the darkness. It was raw, and it was real, and it was the most beautiful, terrible mistake of my life. I woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silk sheets were tangled around my legs, and the other side of the massive bed was empty. I sat up, my heart sinking. The air in the penthouse was cold. Luca? Silence. The sterile, empty silence of a museum. There was no note on the pillow, no sign of him, except for the lingering warmth where his body had been. A cold, familiar knot of shame tightened in my stomach. Of course. What did I expect? Flowers? I was the waitress from Eastwick. He was Luca Moretti. I was a diversion, a moment of weakness, a shared loneliness that daylight had burned away. I scrambled out of the bed, my skin crawling. I found my cheap clothes, not on the floor, but neatly folded on a leather armchair. Had he done that? Or had a maid come in while I slept? The thought made me feel sick. I dressed quickly, my hands fumbling with my buttons. I felt used. Even though I had been a willing participant, I had let my guard down, and this was the price. I left the penthouse without looking back, taking the silent, private elevator down to a lobby of marble and echoing silence. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and walked out into the morning chill. Back to my world. I would bury this night. I would file it away with all the other scars. It was a one-time mistake. 2 weeks passed. The memory should have faded, but it clung to me like a phantom limb. I worked double shifts, scrubbing counters and running plates, trying to exorcise the feeling of silk sheets in his quiet, gravelly voice. I was exhausted, but it was a new kind of fatigue, a sickness deep in my bones. Then, the smell of frying bacon turned my stomach. It was a smell that had been the soundtrack to my life for 3 years. But one morning, the scent hit me, and I had to run. I spent my 10-minute break in the staff bathroom, my head over the toilet, heaving until my eyes watered. My friend, Josie, who worked the counter, found me splashing cold water on my face. "Girl, you look green," she said, leaning against the door frame, chewing her gum. "That's the 3rd time this week. You late." "I'm never late," I said, confused. "I'm always 10 minutes early for my shift." Josie rolled her eyes. "Not for your shift, idiot, for your period." I froze, my hand on the faucet, the water drummed against the porcelain. I counted the days. My cycle was never perfect. I was always stressed, but not this erratic. My mind flashed, unwelcome, to a penthouse bedroom and silk sheets, the one-time mistake. "No," I whispered. The word had no air behind it. "It can't be." Josie's expression softened from a smirk to genuine concern. "Camilla, go to the pharmacy after your shift. Just check. Better to know." The fluorescent lights of the pharmacy felt like an interrogation. They were too bright, exposing everything. I bought the cheapest test they had, hiding the small box under a bag of potato chips and a bottle of soda. My hands were sweating so badly I almost dropped my change. I ran the 12 blocks back to my apartment. I fumbled with the 3 deadbolts, my breath catching in my throat. I tossed the chips on the counter and locked myself in the tiny, water-stained bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub for 10 minutes, just staring at the box. "Please, no, please, no, please, no." I couldn't put it off. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely tear the plastic wrapper. I followed the instructions, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I set the small plastic stick on the edge of the sink, next to the cracked soap. 3 minutes, the box said. It felt like 3 years. I couldn't watch it. I walked out, went to the kitchen, and drank a glass of tap water that tasted like rust. I stared at the peeling wallpaper by my stove. This was impossible. It was one night, one single night of weakness. My alarm on my phone chimed. 3 minutes. I forced my legs to move. I walked back into the bathroom. I stood over the sink. I looked down. It wasn't a line. It wasn't a plus sign. It was a tiny, illuminated digital window. It held one word. Positive. My legs buckled. I didn't fall. I just slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold, gritty linoleum floor. Positive. The word echoed in the silence of my apartment. Positive, positive, positive. My world didn't just tilt. It cracked open, and I fell into the abyss. I wasn't just Camilla Reyes, the waitress. I was Camilla Reyes, the waitress carrying Luca Moretti's child. The panic was cold and sharp. It flooded my veins, stopping my breath. This wasn't a baby. It was a death sentence. He was mafia. He was dangerous. His world was violence and secrets. What would he do if he found out? Would he think I was trying to trap him? Would he get rid of me? Or worse, would his enemies find out? I wasn't a person anymore. I was a liability. I was a pawn. I was a target, and I was carrying one. I don't know how long I sat on the floor. An hour? The sun had set, and the apartment was dark, lit only by the streetlights outside. I stood up. My movements were robotic. I grabbed the test from the sink. I had to get rid of it. I had to erase it. If there was no proof, it wasn't real. I went to the kitchen sink, fumbling in the junk drawer for the lighter I used for the pilot light on the stove. The cheap plastic sparked, and a small, weak flame appeared. I held the pregnancy test over the stainless steel basin. I put the flame to the plastic end. It caught slowly at first, the plastic browning at the edges. Then it flared, an ugly, chemical orange. The plastic began to curl and blacken, melting, twisting into a grotesque shape. The digital screen warped, the word positive distorting, stretching, before it was consumed by the acrid, black smoke. I watched it burn until it was nothing but a charred, unrecognizable lump. And I cried, hot, silent, terrified tears. They dripped into the sink, sizzling on the hot, melted plastic. I was erasing the proof. I was trying to erase the last 2 weeks. I was trying to erase him. I would forget this. I would handle this. I would find a clinic. I would fix this. I would survive this, just like I survived everything else, alone. Across the city, in a penthouse floating in the sky, Luca Moretti stood in front of a wall of glass, staring at the same skyline we had shared. He hadn't slept in 2 days. He'd handled a shipment that had gone bad, broken a rival's hold on the docks, and attended 3 meetings that decided the fates of men he'd never met. But his mind wasn't on the violence. It was on the feeling of threadbare cotton under his hands. It was on the scent of cheap diner coffee and soap. It was on the look in her eyes, that same haunted, broken tragedy he saw in the mirror every morning. He had left her that morning because that's what he did. He didn't do connection. Connection was weakness. Connection got people killed. His father had taught him that with his fists. But for 2 weeks, the silence of his penthouse felt different. It hadn't felt peaceful. It felt empty. It felt wrong. He had told himself she was a mistake, a single night of weakness, a ghost he needed to forget. He picked up his phone from the glass table. "Rafe," he said into the silence. "Boss, that waitress from the Beacon, the one from 2 weeks ago, Camila Reyes." A pause. "What about her?" "I want to know where she is," Luca said, his voice low. "Now." He had to see her again. He just didn't know why. Burning the test didn't burn away the truth. It just left a foul, chemical stink in my tiny kitchen and a knot of cold dread in my stomach that wouldn't dissolve. The word positive was branded on the inside of my eyelids. For 3 days, I lived in a fog. I went to work. I smiled at customers. I refilled ketchup bottles. I wiped down counters, but I was gone. I was a ghost in my own body, moving on autopilot while the real me was trapped in that cold, paralyzing moment in the bathroom. At night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my wobbly kitchen table, the laptop I'd bought secondhand casting a pale blue light on my face. My search history was a timeline of my panic. Clinics near Eastwick, options. How long do I have? I'd click a link, and a sterile, pink and white web page would load. Your choice. Your future. The words were meant to be comforting, but they felt like a mockery. I would stare at the phone number, my fingers hovering over my phone. I couldn't do it. I would close the laptop, my throat tight. Every time I thought I'd made the decision, a wave of nausea would crash over me. So profound it left me dizzy. It wasn't just the hormones, it was him. It was the memory of his eyes, that flash of shared, broken loneliness. It was the impossible feeling of safety I'd felt in his arms. How could I erase the only night in my life I hadn't felt completely alone, even if the man who'd held me was a monster? The emotional weight was crushing. I was carrying a secret that was both a life and a death sentence, and it was his, Luca Moretti's. I was scrubbing the grill at the diner. the smell of grease thicker than usual. When the bell above the door chimed, that same heavy, silent toll. My back went rigid. I didn't have to turn around. The air in the diner had changed. The sizzle of the grill, the low murmur of the two cops in booth 4. It all went quiet, sucked into the vacuum that surrounded him. "Camilla," Josie hissed from the pass-through window, "you're 9 o'clock. I squeezed my eyes shut for just a second. Not now. Please, not now. I turned around slowly, wiping my hands on my apron. He was there, sitting in the same booth. He wasn't in a suit this time, just a dark, perfectly fitted Henley that showed the hard lines of his shoulders and chest. He looked less like a boss and more like a predator at rest. His men were absent. He was alone. He was watching me. I picked up my notepad, my feet feeling like they were sinking into the linoleum. I walked over, forcing my gaze to stay on the notepad. "Can I help you?" "Coffee, black." His voice was the same, low, smooth gravel. It wrapped around my spine. I nodded, poured the coffee, and brought it to him. My hand was shaking. I hated that my hand was shaking. I set the mug down and a little bit of coffee sloshed over the rim. "Sorry," I mumbled, grabbing a napkin to wipe it. His hand covered mine on the table. His skin was warm. The contact was electric, a jolt of pure, terrified adrenaline. I snatched my hand back like I'd been burned. "You're pale," he said. It wasn't an observation. It was an accusation. "Long shift," I lied, keeping my eyes down. "Will there be anything else?" "Look at me, Camilla." I didn't want to. Looking at him was like staring into the sun. It was dangerous. But I did. I forced my chin up. His eyes were intense, searching. He was scanning my face, my eyes, my mouth, as if looking for an answer to a question he hadn't asked. He saw the new, dark circles under my eyes. He saw the anxiety I couldn't hide. "You're not sleeping," he stated. "I'm fine." The lie was paper thin. "Do you want anything else? Or just the coffee?" He leaned back in the booth, a flicker of something, frustration, maybe in his eyes. He never broke eye contact. "Just the coffee, for now." I all but ran back to the kitchen. I spent the next hour hiding, washing dishes that were already clean, until Josie told me he had left. He'd left a $20 bill for a $2 coffee. He knew something was wrong. He didn't come back for 2 days. I started to breathe again. I convinced myself he'd lost interest. He'd seen the pale, anxious girl and realized the woman from his penthouse was gone. My shift ended late on Thursday. The street was empty. The air was damp and cold. I pulled my thin jacket tight and started the 12-block walk home. I made it 2 blocks before I felt it. The prickle on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I didn't turn around. I kept walking, my pace quickening. I crossed the street, pretending to check traffic. He was there, half a block behind me, a dark shape under a flickering streetlight. He wasn't in his car. He was on foot. He was following me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Walk. Just walk. Don't run. Running is for prey. I turned a corner, my sneakers slipping on the damp pavement. He turned the corner. He wasn't rushing. He was just coming. I ducked into the all-night pharmacy, the automatic doors whispering open. The fluorescent lights were blinding. I grabbed a basket I didn't need and walked into the aisles, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I hid in the vitamin aisle, pretending to read the labels on bottles of prenatal vitamins. The irony was so bitter, it made me want to gag. I could see the door. He didn't come in. He just stood outside, in the dark, watching me through the glass. He knew. I don't know how, but he knew. I stayed in there for 20 minutes, until my presence started to look suspicious to the night cashier. Finally, I bought a bottle of water and walked out. He was gone. The street was empty again. I ran the rest of the way home. The next few days were a blur of terror. Every time the diner bell rang, I jumped. Every dark car that passed me on the street made my heart stop. I felt like I was being hunted. I stopped researching clinics. I couldn't think at all. I was just waiting. I came home from my shift on Saturday night, exhausted and sick. The nausea was constant now. I climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, my keys clutched in my hand like a weapon. I turned the corner of the hallway, and I stopped. He was there, leaning against my apartment door, casual, as if he owned the entire building. My blood ran cold. "How did you find me?" My voice was a whisper. "It wasn't hard," he said. He looked tired. He looked dangerous. "You're a hard woman to forget, Camilla." "You need to leave," I said, trying to sound brave, trying to find the anger. "You can't be here. We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about." I moved to push past him, to get to my 3 deadbolts. He didn't move. He just held up his hand. In it was a small, clear plastic bag, a Ziploc bag, like you'd put a sandwich in. Inside it was the charred, melted lump of plastic I had pulled from my sink. I couldn't breathe. The hallway tilted. "My men went through your trash," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I told them to. I had to know why you looked like you'd seen a ghost." He held the bag up, closer to my face. The dim hallway light caught the warped, melted surface in the center of the black ruin. One small part of the digital screen had survived, protected by a bubble of melted plastic. You could just make out the letters. "Imitate." "Is it true?" he asked. His voice wasn't flat anymore. It wasn't the voice of the mafia boss. It was the voice I'd heard in the car, the broken, lonely one. It cracked on the last word. It's not," I stammered, my words failing. "I don't know what that is." "Don't," he whispered. The word was a plea. "Please, Camilla, don't lie to me. Is it true?" I looked from the charred plastic to his face. His eyes were wide, filled with a raw, terrifying storm of emotion. He wasn't angry. He was shattered. And I broke. The strength that had held me together, the invisible wires that kept me upright, they all snapped. A sob tore from my chest, a sound so painful it ripped my throat. My knees gave out. I didn't hit the floor. He caught me. He moved so fast, dropping the bag, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me against his hard chest as I collapsed. He slid down the wall with me until we were both sitting on the dirty linoleum floor of my apartment hallway. I buried my face in his shirt, which smelled like clean leather and him, and I wept. I cried for the test, for the secret, for the terror. I cried for the life I had and the life I was carrying. He just held me. His hand was buried in my hair, holding my head against his shoulder. His other arm was wrapped around me so tightly I could barely breathe. I felt his whole body trembling. I didn't know what to do. I choked out, the words muffled. You're you. I was scared. I was so scared. "Shh," he whispered, but his own voice was rough. I pulled back enough to look at him. His face was wrecked. His eyes were red. A single tear traced a path down his sharp cheekbone. Luca Moretti was crying. "I never wanted this," he breathed, his voice raw. "A child, my father, the blood. I swore I would never, ever." He couldn't finish the sentence. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes squeezed shut. "It's different," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "It's God. It's ours. It's you." We stayed like that for a long time, 2 broken people on a dirty floor, clinging to each other as the world fell apart. Finally, he pulled himself together. The boss slipped back into his eyes like a steel curtain falling. He stood, pulling me up with him. He unlocked my door. He had keys. He'd picked the locks and pushed me gently inside. "You're not staying here tonight, he said, his voice firm. "What? No? Luca, I'm not the—" "It's not safe." He was already walking through my tiny apartment, checking the windows, the fire escape. "There's trouble. With the Castillos, a rival family, things are bad right now. If they knew about you, if they even thought—" I'm not going with you, I snapped, the fear turning to anger. I'm not your property. I'm not some pawn in your game. This is my life. Not anymore, he roared, turning on me. The force of his voice hit me like a physical blow. It's not just your life anymore, Camilla. It's mine, too, and it's that baby's. You are not safe here. I'm safer here than I am with you, I shot back, trembling. Your world is what's dangerous. I want no part of it. He stared at me, his jaw working. The muscle in his cheek jumped. He looked like he wanted to break something. Instead, he just scrubbed his hand over his face. Fine, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Stay. Lock your doors. He walked out, slamming the apartment door behind him. I ran to it, engaging all 3 deadbolts, my heart trying to escape my chest. I spent the night huddled on my sofa, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. I didn't sleep. I must have drifted off around dawn, because I woke to the sound of crashing wood. I screamed. My apartment door, the one with the 3 deadbolts, was splintered. The frame was shattered. It was hanging open. I scrambled back, grabbing the heaviest thing I could find, a cast-iron skillet. My apartment was destroyed. The sofa cushions were slashed. My few belongings were thrown everywhere. The mattress was flipped. And on my bed, on my pillow, was a single white envelope. My name was written on it, Camilla. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. Inside was a piece of paper. There were no fingerprints, just 5 words, cut from magazines. We know who you are. We know what you are. I dropped the note. I backed away, my skillet raised. I didn't know who to call. The police. What would I tell them? I pulled out my phone. My fingers fumbled. I only had 1 number. The one he'd put in my phone that night in the car. I pressed call. He answered on the first ring. Camilla. He wasn't asleep. Luca. My voice was a strangled sob. They were here. My door. Oh God, it's all broken. There's a note. Silence. A cold, deadly silence. I'm 5 minutes away. Lock yourself in the bathroom. Don't come out until you hear my voice. The door is broken. Go, now. I heard the roar of an engine through the phone before he hung up. He wasn't lying. It felt like 2 minutes later I heard heavy, running footsteps in the hall. Camilla! I opened the bathroom door, my entire body shaking. Luca stood in the center of my ruined living room. The fury radiating off him was so intense it was almost visible. It was a cold, black fire. He wasn't the broken man from the hallway. This was the boss. This was the monster. Rafe, he barked into his phone. They were here. Her apartment. Find them. Find them. I want patrols on this street block by block. I want every Castillo rat found and brought to me. He hung up and looked at me. The fury in his eyes softened, just slightly. When he saw my face, "Get your purse," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. "You're coming with me." This time, I didn't argue. He didn't take me to the penthouse. We drove out of the city, heading north. The black sedan ate up the miles in silence. I just stared out the window, watching the broken urban sprawl give way to pine trees and dark, empty roads. After an hour, we turned onto a private, unpaved road. We drove for another 10 minutes, the woods thick on either side. We emerged into a clearing. There was a house, but it wasn't a house. It was a fortress of dark wood and glass, built into the side of a hill, overlooking a massive, dark lake. It was remote. It was beautiful. It was a prison. "Where are we?" I whispered. "My lake house," he said, shutting off the engine. "No one knows about this place, not even most of my men. You'll be safe here." He led me inside. It was warm, the air smelling of cedar and wood smoke. A fire was already crackling in a massive stone fireplace. He must have called ahead. "There's food in the fridge, a room upstairs. Sleep," he ordered, shrugging off his jacket. "Are you staying?" "I have to go back, Inair," he said, his jaw tight. "I have to handle this." "Handle this? By killing them?" The words were out before I could stop them. He stopped, his back to me. "They threatened you. Camilla, they threatened our child. He said the words, our child, like they were foreign, like he was testing their weight. There is no line I won't cross to protect you. You need to understand that. He left. I was alone in the giant, silent house. I found the bedroom. It was luxurious, with a bed bigger than my entire kitchen. I fell into it and slept for 14 hours. He was gone for 2 days. The rain started on the second night, a cold, driving storm that lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the lake into a gray, churning mass. I was huddled by the fireplace, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, when I heard the front door open. Luca walked in, dripping wet. He looked exhausted. There was a darkness under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He shrugged off his wet coat and tossed it on a chair. "Is it handled?" I asked, my voice small. "It's handled." His voice was flat. I didn't want to know what that meant. He walked over to the fireplace, holding his hands out to the flames. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackling fire and the howling wind. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice low, still staring into the fire. "Do what? Be a mafia boss?" "Be a father." He turned to look at me. My father, he wasn't just a bad man, Camilla, he was cruel. He taught me that love was weakness, that emotion was a liability. He hit my mother. He hit me. I grew up promising myself one thing, just one. He knelt in front of me, his expression raw, the firelight catching the moisture in his eyes. I promised I would never, ever be him, and now I have his blood. And I'm bringing a child into his world. How can I be anything else? "You're not him, Luca." The words were quiet, but I meant them. The man I saw in the hallway. The man who cried with me. That's not your father. "You don't know what I've done, the things I'm capable of." "I know you came back for me," I whispered. "I know you were broken when you saw the test." He reached out, his hand hesitating before he touched my cheek. His fingers were calloused, but his touch was unbelievably gentle. "I look at you, and I don't feel like him. I feel something else, something I don't understand." The emotional bond, the invisible string between us, pulled tight. The air was thick with the storm outside and the tension inside. This wasn't the raw, desperate need of the penthouse. This was something deeper, slower. I leaned into his touch, my eyes closing. His hand slid from my cheek into my hair, his fingers tangling in the strands. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. The kiss was slow, it was cautious. It was a question. It wasn't about passion, it was about solace. It tasted of rain and wood smoke and the promise of safety. He pulled back, his forehead resting against mine. "I'm scared, Camilla," he whispered, a confession that must have cost him everything. "Me too," I breathed. "I'm scared of what kind of father you'll be. I'm scared of this world." He kissed me again, deeper this time. A quiet exploration. His other arm came around my waist, pulling me from the chair, onto my knees, so we were facing each other on the thick rug. His hands were gentle, tracing my shoulders, my back, as if he were afraid I'd break. "I will be better," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion, his lips moving against my jaw. "I swear to you, I will be better than him, for you, and for the baby." He held me, his arms a fortress against the storm, and in the warm glow of the firelight, surrounded by the woods and the rain, I let the man who was both my captor and my savior hold me. I let myself believe, just for a night, that his promise was one he could keep. The promise he made by the fire, the one to be a better man, hung in the air of the lake house for almost a week. It created a strange, fragile peace. We existed in a bubble of cedar smoke and lakeside mist. He was there, really there. He didn't just have his men bring food, he cooked. Simple, clumsy meals of pasta and scorched toast, which he served with a look of defiant pride. We talked. He'd sit on the floor by the fireplace while I curled on the sofa, and he'd ask me questions. He asked about foster care, about my shifts at the diner, about the high school I'd barely finished. He listened with an intensity that was almost unnerving, as if he were memorizing my life, trying to find the places where the damage had set in. He was trying so hard to be the man from the fireside, the one who had confessed his fears, that I almost forgot about the boss. Almost. Then came the doctor's visit. He didn't ask me. He told me, "We're going to see a doctor today. A good one. Someone I trust." It wasn't a sterile clinic in Eastwick. He drove us 2 hours into the city, to a tall, gray stone building with ivy and old money. The name on the brass plaque read, Dr. Aris Alistair. The waiting room was silent, furnished with antiques. I was a stray cat in a palace. Doctor. Alistair was a woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a polite, clinical smile. She spoke only to me, which I appreciated, but I could feel Luca's presence in the corner of the room like a physical weight. He was a thunderstorm packed into a tailored suit, pretending to read a boating magazine. "Well, Camilla," the doctor said, her voice neutral as she read the chart, "you've been through a lot of stress. Let's just confirm things, shall we?" She was all business. She had me lie down. The room was dim. Luca stood in the corner, his back rigid. The ultrasound gel was cold, a sharp, sudden shock that made me gasp. "Just relax." "Doctor," Alistair said, her voice softening for the first time. She pressed the transducer to my stomach. "Now, you're still very early, around 9 weeks, I'd say. We might not see much." She stopped. A static hiss filled the room. She adjusted a knob, and then there it was. A sound, not a sound, a rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. It was fast, like a frantic bird's wings, filling every corner of the silent, expensive room. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. "Doctor," Alistair smiled. "There we are, a strong, healthy heartbeat." I hadn't realized I was crying until a tear hit the paper sheet. This wasn't a burnt test. This wasn't nausea. This wasn't a secret that could be handled. This was real. It was alive. I turned my head to look at Luca. He was gone. The boss, the monster, the predator. The man standing there was pale, his skin grayish under the dim lights. His knuckles were white where he gripped the back of a leather chair. He was staring at the monitor, at the flickering black and white shape. But his focus was on the sound. He looked shattered. He looked like he'd been shot. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of a life he never wanted, a life he had sworn he'd never create, forcing its way into the world. "Luca?" I whispered. He didn't seem to hear me. He took one step toward the machine. His hand, the one I'd seen rest on a gun at his hip, lifted. It was trembling. He didn't touch the screen, just hovered his fingers in the air near it, as if feeling the heat from a fire. Is it supposed to be that fast?" he asked, his voice thick, unrecognizable. "Perfectly normal, Doctor," Alistair said gently. "Congratulations, Mr. Moretti. You're going to be a father." That word, father, hit him. He flinched. Pulling his hand back, he straightened his suit jacket, forcing the mask of the boss back into place. But it was cracked. His eyes were too wide, too bright. On the drive back to the lake house, he was silent. He just drove, his hands locked on the wheel. When we got inside, he walked to the massive windows overlooking the lake, staring out at the water. "I'll protect you," he said, his back to me. "Luca, you already—" "No." He turned, and his eyes were burning with a new, terrifying resolve. "I mean it. I will protect you, and I will protect that." He pointed toward my stomach. The heartbeat had changed him. It had taken the abstract idea of a child and made it a reality. It had turned his vow from a promise into something primal. But that kind of resolve, in a man like Luca, had consequences. News, I was learning, traveled in his world like blood in water. My existence, the pregnant girl hidden away at the boss's private lake house, was a secret that couldn't be kept. The men who guarded the perimeter, the doctor he trusted, the cook who brought groceries, they all had eyes. They all had mouths. The Castillos know, he said one night, pacing the length of the living room, his phone clutched in his hand. Rafe says the whispers are everywhere. They think you're leverage. The bubble of peace didn't just pop. It exploded. The fear came rushing back in, cold and sharp. I wasn't Camilla. I was leverage, a thing, a tool to be used against him. What does that mean? I asked, my hand instinctively going to my stomach. It means they're stupid, Luca growled. It means they think threatening you will make me weak. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes black. It just makes me angry. He doubled the guards. I saw them now, patrolling the tree line, dark shapes in dark suits, carrying long guns. The lake house was no longer a haven. It was a fortress, and I was its prisoner. Luca became distant again, consumed by the threat. He was on the phone constantly, his voice dropping to that cold, flat tone that chilled my blood. He was the boss again. He was sitting in his study late one night. I brought him a cup of coffee, needing to see the man from the fireside, not the general. The door was cracked open. I don't care how you do it, Rafe, he was saying, his voice a low snarl. Find the leak. Someone is talking. Someone on the inside. Find them. And when you do, you know what to do. I backed away slowly. Find the leak. One of his own men was betraying him. Betraying us. The attack came 2 nights later. The night was heavy, still, and moonless. The silence of the woods pressed in on the house. Luca was on edge. He hadn't slept. He was sitting in the dark living room, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table, just listening. Go to bed, Camilla, he said, not looking at me. I'll wait with you. No, go, now, I need to think. I went upstairs, but I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the silence, listening to the thump-thump of my own blood. And then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong, the crunch of gravel outside, where there was only pine needles. I sat up, my heart stopping. Downstairs, I heard a chair scrape softly. I padded to the top of the stairs, in the massive, moonlit entryway below. I saw Luca. He was not in the living room. He was pressed against the wall by the front door, a dark shape in the dark, and in his hand was his gun, now fitted with a long, black silencer. He looked up, his eyes finding me in the darkness. He didn't wave me back. He just pointed to the bedroom, the closet. Now. I ran. I fumbled into the deep walk-in closet, burying myself behind his hanging suits, my hands over my mouth to stifle my own breathing. I heard the sound of the front lock being picked. It was a delicate, metallic click. The front door whispered open. I heard footsteps, more than one, shuffling, cautious. Upstairs. Find the girl, a voice whispered. It wasn't Luca's. A floorboard creaked at the bottom of the stairs. Then a sound. A soft, ugly cough, a grunt, a heavy, sickening thud as a body hit the wooden floor. Another voice cursed. Boss? Marco? 2 more. Quick. Another thud. Silence. A terrible, absolute silence that stretched for an eternity. My heart was going to break through my ribs. I was suffocating behind the smell of his clothes. The closet door opened. I screamed, a muffled, tiny sound. It's me, Luca's voice. He was breathing heavily, but his voice was calm. It's over. You're safe. He reached in and pulled me out. I was shaking so hard I couldn't stand. I collapsed against him. You're safe, Camilla. I've got you, he murmured, his arms a steel cage around me. But I wasn't safe. I had never been less safe. I pulled away, my legs unsteady. I had to see. I walked out of the bedroom, my hand gripping the railing of the balcony that overlooked the entryway. And I saw them. 2 men, sprawled at the bottom of the stairs in pools of dark, glistening blood. Their eyes were open, vacant. Luca was already beside me. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at me, gauging my reaction. Camilla, you killed them, I whispered. My voice didn't sound like my own. They were here to take you, he said, his voice flat. You just... I did what I had to do. He walked past me, down the stairs, stepping over the bodies with an indifference that made me sick. He crouched by one of the men, pulling open his jacket. He was checking for a phone, a wallet. He was working. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't angry. He wasn't horrified. He was calm. It was the calmness that broke me. It was the detached, professional efficiency of it all. This was his world. This was his job. This was the man I was tied to. This was the father of the life inside me. I turned and ran back into the bedroom, slamming the door. I locked it. I threw up in the bathroom. I scrubbed my face, trying to wash the sight of the blood from my eyes. I heard him on the phone downstairs, his voice the same cold, flat tone. "It's done. 2. Castillo colors. Send the cleanup crew and find Rafe. The leak is worse than we thought." He gave them the location. The trauma kept me awake all night. I sat on the floor, my back against the locked door, hugging my knees. The baby I had felt so connected to, whose heartbeat had made me cry, now felt like a curse. I couldn't bring it into this. I couldn't. At dawn, I heard his footsteps outside the door. He tried the handle. "Camilla, open the door. They're gone. The house is clean." Clean, like it was a spill. I didn't answer. I waited until I heard his footsteps recede. He was in the study, his voice a low, furious rumble on the phone. I made my decision. I quietly opened the bedroom door. The house was immaculate. The entryway floor gleamed. The smell of bleach hung faintly in the air. If not for the splintered door jamb, it might never have happened. I grabbed my old, thin jacket from the closet. He'd had his men retrieve my things from the ruined apartment. I slipped on my sneakers. I found the cash he'd left on the dresser, a few $1,000s. I stuffed it in my pocket. I slipped out the back door, into the cold, misty morning. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I would rather be alone and hunted in Eastwick than a protected prisoner in his world of calm violence. I ran toward the woods, toward the gravel road that led to the highway. I didn't get far. I reached the edge of the tree line, where the mist clung to the ground. He was there, leaning against a massive pine, his arms crossed. He wasn't even breathing hard. He was just waiting. He had known. "Where are you going, Camilla?" he asked. His voice was quiet, dangerous. "Let me go," I panted, backing away. I won't, let me go." "Go where? Back to your apartment? The Castillos will have you in an hour. Back to the diner? You think you're safe?" "I don't care. It's better than this." He pushed off the tree and walked toward me, his steps slow, deliberate. "You think I'd let you go back to being alone while you carry my child?" The words hit me, angry, possessive, and desperately hurt. "It's not about being alone," I screamed, the words tearing out of me. "I'm used to being alone. It's about this." I pointed back at the house. "I saw you, Luca, last night. You didn't even flinch. You were calm. You were cleaning up a mess. That's what it was to you." Tears were streaming down my face, hot and angry. "I will not have a baby in this world. I will not let my child see that. I won't let him grow up to be you." The words struck him harder than a bullet. He actually recoiled, his face going pale. The anger vanished, replaced by that raw, broken look from the doctor's office. He stared at me for a long moment, the mist swirling around us. "Get in the car," he said, his voice rough. "No, I'm not going back to that house." "We're not." He grabbed my arm, gently but firmly. "Get in the car. There's something I have to show you." He drove me, not back to the city, but deeper into the woods, to a small, private cemetery, overgrown with ivy and wild roses. It was old. He stopped the car and got out. He led me through the wrought iron gate to a single headstone of white marble, grayed with age. Eleonora Moretti, beloved mother. "This is her," he said, his voice hollow. "My mother." He stood there, staring at the name. "You're right, I was calm. I was trained to be. I've been this since I was 16. He traced the engraved letters with his finger. My father wasn't just cruel. He was a monster. He enjoyed the power. He enjoyed the pain. He'd come home, and the heir would just die. My mother. He gestured to the stone. She was soft. She loved flowers. She tried to protect me. She would stand between us, and she paid for it. He looked at me, his eyes dark with history. He broke her. Camilla, not just her bones, her spirit. She died when I was 12. They said it was pneumonia, but she gave up. She stopped fighting. He looked back at the grave. I stood right here, at her funeral, and I watched him. He didn't shed a tear. He was just annoyed. I swore that day I would never be him. I would never be weak. I would be so strong, so cold, that no one could ever hurt me, that no one could ever hurt anyone I cared about. He finally turned to me, his face a mask of pain. I thought being cold was how I protected you. I thought being calm was how I kept you safe. And you looked at me last night, and you saw him. You saw my father. He had named my deepest fear. He had named his deepest fear. I don't know how to be a man, Camilla, he whispered, his voice cracking. I only know how to be a boss. I don't know how to love, right? But I want to. I want to be a better man. For you. For this baby. He was asking for a chance, not as a boss, but as a man. I stood there, the cold air seeping into my jacket, the heartbeat I was carrying a steady reminder. He was a killer, but he was also a broken boy at his mother's grave. I'll stay, I said, my voice shaking, but not as a prisoner, on my terms. He looked up, surprised. Anything? No more secrets. You tell me what's happening, the truth, all of it. I'm not leverage. I'm your partner in this. And I took a deep breath. I'm not giving birth in that fortress or in some private clinic. I choose the hospital, a real one. I choose the doctor. I get a say in my life, in our child's life. He watched me, a new respect in his eyes. He was seeing me, not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as someone as strong as him, just in a different way. He nodded, slowly. Transparency. And you choose? Okay, I agree. That night, the tension in the house was different. It wasn't the fear of an attack or the fragile peace. It was a new, raw honesty. After dinner, he took my hand. Come with me. He led me out the back, not to the woods, but along a stone path, hidden by overgrown lilac bushes. Behind the house, tucked away, was a large Victorian-style greenhouse. Its glass panes were covered in dust, the frames sagging, but it was beautiful. He pushed open the creaking door. The air inside was cool and smelled of damp earth and something faintly sweet. My mother built this, he said, his voice soft. It was her place, her sanctuary. I haven't been in here since she died. The stars were brilliant, far from the city's glow, and they shone down through the dusty glass roof, bathing the room in faint silver light. It was quiet, sacred. He turned to me, his face illuminated by starlight. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, his eyes asking the question he'd been too afraid to voice. Can you still? After what you saw? I gave him my answer. I stepped forward and rested my hand on his chest. I could feel his heart beating, steady and strong beneath my palm. This wasn't the desperate collision of the penthouse or the fearful comfort by the fire. This was a conscious choice. He raised his hand, the one that had held a gun, and touched my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone. His touch was hesitant, reverent. He was terrified of breaking me. I leaned into his hand, closing my eyes, and he dipped his head. His kiss was soft, a promise. It was a vow to be the man from the grave, not the man from the hallway. There were no words. There was only the starlight and the scent of sleeping flowers, and the quiet, desperate attempt of two broken people trying to heal each other. He was slow, gentle, his movements a wordless apology, a plea for forgiveness, and I held him, my fingers tracing the hard muscles of his back, accepting his darkness, because I had finally seen his light. He laid me down on a pile of old, soft burlap sacks in the corner, and as the starlight streamed down, he kissed my stomach, a gesture of awe, a pledge to the life we had made in the wreckage of our own. The lake house, with its cedar smoke and bloody memories, was behind us. Luca moved me into the Moretti mansion in the heart of Eastwick. It was not the sterile, glass penthouse where our story began. This was his inheritance. It was a fortress of old, heavy stone, set back from the street behind a 10-foot wrought iron fence. It was dark, filled with heavy wood furniture that smelled of polish and history, and haunted by the ghosts of a family I wanted no part of. But something was different. The men in suits who patrolled the grounds, the housekeeper who silently brought me tea, they didn't look through me. They looked at me. Their eyes, so often cold and empty, now held a visible, startling respect. When I walked through the grand, echoing foyer, they stopped talking. They nodded. "Ma'am?" They held doors. I was no longer the waitress. I was no longer a secret. I was, in their eyes, the mother of the Moretti heir. The realization settled on me like a heavy, velvet cloak, and I wasn't sure if it was armor or a shroud. I was, by my count, almost 6 months pregnant. The nausea had faded, replaced by a dull ache in my back and a life inside me that was making itself known. I was visibly carrying his child. Life in the mansion was a quiet, suffocating routine. I was an observer, a quiet ghost in a house of violent men. The fragile peace we'd found in the greenhouse, the promise of transparency, was being tested. The war with the Castillos was escalating. Luca was slipping away from me. The man who had confessed his fears at his mother's grave, the man who had clumsily built a fire, was being swallowed by the boss. His study door, once open, was now perpetually closed. I'd walk by and hear the low, angry rumble of his voice, or the deeper tones of his right-hand man, Rafe. He started coming to bed late. Long after I'd fallen into an uneasy sleep, he'd slip under the covers, and his skin would be cold, smelling of the night air and something metallic I couldn't place. His dark moods became more frequent. He'd stand for an hour, staring out the reinforced windows of our bedroom, his jaw tight, his eyes flat and cold. He was the man from the lake house attack, the one whose calmness had terrified me. I feared I was losing him, not to another woman, but to the darkness he had sworn he was fighting. He was becoming unreachable, and the more I tried to hold him, the more he felt like smoke. "Talk to me, Luca," I pleaded one night, stopping him as he tried to leave the room, his suit jacket already on. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob, but he didn't turn around. "It's better if you don't know the details. Camilla, it's ugly." "You promised," I whispered, my hand on my belly. "Transparency, you promised you wouldn't lock me out." He turned, and his face was tired, so incredibly tired. He scrubbed his hand over his jaw. "The Castillos hit one of my warehouses on the docks. They're not just trying to take territory anymore. They're trying to send a message. It's getting bloody." "And?" I pressed, sensing there was more. He hesitated. "And there's a journalist, some local stringer named Doyle. He's been asking questions." My blood ran cold. "What questions?" "Questions at the Beacon. Questions about you, about the waitress who left with Luca Moretti, the one who disappeared and turned up pregnant." He saw the fear in my eyes, and his expression hardened. "He won't find you. I've handled it." "Handled it? Like you handled the men at the lake house?" "It's handled, Camilla. That's all you need to know." He turned and left the room, the click of the door shutting him away from me again. The tension in the house grew thicker. I felt like I was walking on glass, waiting for it to break. It finally shattered 3 nights later. I couldn't sleep. The baby was active, a restless, rolling pressure under my ribs. Luca's side of the bed was cold, the clock reading 2 in the morning. I got up, pulling on a silk robe I'd found in the closet, another gift I hadn't asked for, and went to find him. His study door was cracked. I heard voices, his and Rafe's. It's too much exposure, Luca, Rafe said. His voice was clinical, practical. I'd only seen him a few times, a tall, severe man who looked more like a lawyer than a thug. The journalist is one problem. A war with the Castillos is another. She's not just leverage anymore. She's a liability. I froze, my hand flat against the cool wallpaper of the hallway. What are you suggesting, Rafe? Luca's voice was low, exhausted. You move her. Far. Sicily or a private estate in Switzerland. Somewhere clean, with our people. Secure. She has the baby there. When this war is over and the reporter is buried, you bring her home. It's the only logical move. For her safety. For the child's. I waited, my breath held in my throat, my heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm. I waited for Luca to tell him no, to say he'd promised, to honor our agreement. Silence. A long, heavy silence that meant he was considering it. That silence was the betrayal. I didn't knock. I pushed the door open. They both looked up, startled. Rafe, Fetti, standing by the desk, immediately straightened, his face impassive. Luca, sitting in his high-backed leather chair, looked at guilty. Camilla. He started to stand. You're sending me away. I said, it wasn't a question. My voice was flat, dead. Luca shot Rafe a look. Leave us. Rafe nodded once and walked out, closing the door softly behind him. It's just talk, Luca said, walking around the desk. Rafe is just planning contingencies. Switzerland, I asked, my voice shaking. Sicily? You were going to ship me off like a package you needed to keep safe. For your safety. Yes. His voice rose, the boss returning. Did you not hear him? There is a war starting, and a reporter is about to put your face on the front page. How do I protect you then? How do I stop a bullet from some Castillo bastard I can't see? That's not protection, Luca. That's a cage. It's the same thing. It is not the same thing, he roared, his hands clenched. I'm trying to keep you alive. You promised me. I was crying now, hot, angry tears. You stood at your mother's grave, and you promised me I would have a choice. You promised me transparency. You let me think I was your partner, but I'm just the asset, the incubator, something to be handled. That is not what you are. Then what am I? Why was no not the first word out of your mouth? Why did you hesitate? He had no answer. He just stared at me, his face a mask of anger and cornered frustration. I won't be her, I whispered, the realization hitting me. I won't be your mother, locked away, waiting for you, dying while you fight your wars. I won't do it. I turned and walked out of the study, my feet moving before my mind had caught up. I went to our bedroom, to the massive walk-in closet. I ignored the silk robes and cashmere sweaters. In the back, on the floor, was the small, cheap duffel bag I had brought from the lake house. I started pulling things from the drawers, not the expensive things he'd bought me, my old things, the threadbare t-shirts, the worn-out leggings. What are you doing? His voice was right behind me, low and dangerous. I'm leaving, I said, my hands shaking as I stuffed clothes into the bag. I kept my promise. I stayed, I listened, I tried, but I will not be your prisoner. You are not leaving this house. He grabbed my arm. I ripped it from his grasp. You don't get to control me. You don't get to decide my life. I zipped the bag, the sound raw and final in the silent room. I turned to push past him. I would rather take my chances on the street with the Castillos and the reporters than be locked in your golden cage. You're pregnant. You're carrying my son. Don't you dare. I jabbed a finger at his chest. You don't get to use him as a chain either. I'm a person, Luca, not just a... I stopped. A pain, sharp and searing, shot through my lower back, wrapping around my belly like a steel band. I gasped, my hand flying to my stomach, which had gone rock hard. Oh. I buckled, dropping the bag. The rage, the anger, the boss on Luca's face vanished. It was replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. Camilla, what? What is it? His voice was 2 octaves higher. I don't know, I panted as another wave of pain crashed over me. It was too soon. It was months too soon. It hurts. Luca. He caught me as my knees gave out. He was clumsy, terrified, lowering me to the thick carpet. It's the baby. Is it the baby? Is it coming? It's too early, I cried, clutching his arms. The pain was real. It was terrifying. Okay. He was scrambling, his eyes wild. He looked at the phone, then at me. I'll call Eris. I'll get the car. It just hurts, I sobbed, curling into a ball. He knelt there, his hands hovering over me, afraid to touch me, afraid not to. All his power, all his men, all his cold, calm control, it was gone. He was just a terrified man on a bedroom floor. The emotional tension of the night, the sheer, crushing weight of our fight had done this. The pain lasted for an eternity, holding me in its grip, and then, slowly, it began to ebb. It faded from a searing fire to a dull ache. My breathing slowed. We were both breathing hard, staring at each other. The spilled contents of my duffel bag lay around us. Is it gone? He whispered. I think so, I breathed, my hand still pressed to my belly. It stopped. It was a false alarm. Braxton Hicks, my doctor, had called them, but brought on by a level of stress that was toxic. The adrenaline fled, leaving behind the raw, bleeding edges of our emotions. I looked at him, and my anger was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. This is what you do, I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. You control, you push, you manage, and you handle until everything breaks. You're just like everyone else. Everyone from my past who had power over me. You just have more money. I had meant to hurt him, and I had. He didn't get angry. He slumped, his back hitting the ornate leg of the bed. He looked broken. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders bowing. I don't know how, he whispered. I stared at him. You don't know how... What? He lifted his head, and his eyes were wrecked. They were the eyes of the man at his mother's grave. I don't know how to love right, he said, his voice cracking. I don't know how to do this. This feeling. He gestured, a helpless, broken motion between me and my belly. I know how to protect. I know how to own. I know how to fight. He choked out. That's all he taught me. That's all I am. I see you scared. I see the reporter. I see the Castillos. And the only tool I have is a wall. The only instinct I have is to lock you behind it. He looked at me, his gaze a raw plea. I'm trying, Camilla. I'm trying to be the man from the greenhouse. But the boss knows how to keep you alive. The man doesn't know how to do anything else. He had finally, truly confessed. The next morning, I woke up in bed, and he must have carried me. He was gone, but the house was quiet, too quiet. I got up, my body sore, and found him. He wasn't in his study. His phone was on the kitchen counter, turned off. I found him in a room down the hall, one I'd never entered. It was empty, dusty, with a large window facing the morning sun. He was standing in the middle of the room, over a large, flat-packed cardboard box. He was fumbling with a piece of paper. Instructions. He looked up as I entered. He looked embarrassed. I had Rafe order this. Weeks ago, he said quietly. I didn't know when to... It was a crib. He knelt, pulling out a piece of pale wood, looking at the diagram, then at the wood, completely lost. I canceled my meetings, he said, not looking at me. All of them. That was, for him, an admission of surrender. He was choosing this. Us. I walked in and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. I watched him. He fumbled with a small metal wrench, trying to fit a bolt into a hole that was clearly wrong. He cursed, a low, frustrated sound. He dropped the bolt. A small, quiet laugh escaped me. He looked up, a flicker of a smile, relieved and shy. I pointed. That piece is upside down. He stared at it, then back at the instructions. Oh, We spent the day in that room. He built. I sat and directed. Later, I opened a can of paint he'd hidden in the corner. "What's this?" I asked. "It's yellow." He looked away, embarrassed again. "My mother. She always said yellow was a happy color." We worked. He assembled the crib, his large, scarred hands struggling with the delicate pieces. I took a brush and, sitting on the floor, I began to paint the wall the window light hit. We didn't talk about the fight. We just were. As the afternoon light softened, I felt the walls between us, the real ones, finally dissolve. "You promised," I said quietly, painting a patch of wall, transparency. He stopped, sitting on the floor, the half-built crib between us. He leaned his arms on his knees. "The men at the lake house," he said, his voice flat. "They weren't the first. They were, I don't know, the 15th, the 16th? He told me everything. Not the abstracts, the details. He told me about the first man he'd killed, when he was 19, a Castillo enforcer who had cornered him in an alley. He told me about the betrayal he'd uncovered 2 years ago, a man he'd considered a friend, and what he'd had to do. He told me what it meant to run the docks, what blood had been spilled to hold that power. He was testing me. He was laying the ugliest, darkest parts of himself at my feet, expecting me to run. I just listened. When he was finished, the silence in the room was heavy. "You're not him," I said finally. He looked up, confused. "What?" "Your father." I put the paintbrush down. "You told me he enjoyed it, the cruelty, the pain. When you talk about this, you look like you're carrying the weight of the entire city. You don't enjoy a second of it." I met his gaze. "You're just the only one who can." He stared at me, his eyes bright. I hadn't just forgiven him. I had seen him, the whole terrible, broken man, and I wasn't leaving. The crib was built. The wall was a soft, pale yellow, glowing in the setting sun. I stood by the window, rubbing my belly, the baby calm inside me. He came up behind me. He didn't speak. He just knelt. It was a gesture of supplication, an act of worship. He put his hands on my stomach, his palms spread wide, as if he could protect the life inside. He felt the baby kick, a small flutter against his hand. He leaned his head forward, his rough cheek resting against me, and he kissed my belly. He kissed the spot that had moved. "I'll do better," he whispered, his voice thick. His promise not to me, but to the child. "I swear to you, I'll do better than the man before me." I put my hand on his head, my fingers tangling in his dark hair. It was a silent amen. The yellow nursery was our sanctuary. For 3 weeks, the war with the Castillos felt distant, a low hum of thunder far over the horizon. Luca kept his promise. He was home for dinner every night. He was the man who had laid his head on my belly and sworn to be better. He'd rub my lower back when it ached, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. We were almost normal. But our kind of normal was just a pause between storms. The storm broke on a Tuesday. I was in the kitchen trying to reach a glass on a high shelf, my belly making it an awkward and impossible task. Luca came up behind me, not speaking, his body warm against my back. He reached over me easily, his arm brushing my hair, and grabbed the glass. His phone rang. He set the glass on the counter, his hand lingering on my waist. "Moretti," he answered, his voice still soft. I watched his face. I saw the change. It was a chemical reaction, a sudden, terrifying shift. The softness in his eyes didn't just fade, it flash froze. The warmth in his hand was gone. His jaw set and his eyes, looking at nothing, went flat and black. "When?" was all he said. He listened, his body becoming unnervingly still. "Where is he?" he growled. It wasn't a question. He hung up without saying goodbye. "Luca?" I whispered, my hand on his arm. It was like touching marble. "Rafe is on his way," he said, his voice a low, cold monotone. He pulled away from me and walked to the study. I heard the sound of a safe opening. I followed him, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drum of fear. What's happened? You promised. Luca, you promised to tell me. He was checking the magazine of his handgun, the one he rarely carried in the house. The click-clack of him chambering around was the loudest sound in the room. It's not about you, Camilla, it's Rafe. The front door opened and slammed shut. Rafe, always so calm, so severe, burst into the study. His face was pale, his tie undone. He looked wrecked. Boss, he choked out. They took her from her college apartment. They took Mia. Mia, his younger sister, the one he put through school, the one he protected from all of this. Luca didn't flinch. The ultimatum. Rafe nodded, his eyes glistening. A phone call, a burner. They want to trade. He couldn't look at me. He looked at the floor. Trade, I repeated, my blood turning to ice. Trade for what? Luca slid the gun into the waistband at the small of his back. Pulling his suit jacket over it, he finally looked at me. The man from the nursery was gone. The boss was here. Her life for yours, he said. The air left my lungs. They wanted me. The Castillos had found the one thing, the one person they could use to break the Morettis. They had Rafe's sister, and they wanted Luca's, whatever I was. They want the swap at midnight, Rafe said, his voice cracking. The old shipyard. They said if you're not there, with her, They won't, Luca cut him off, his voice absolute. Get the men, all of them, the warehouse, now. Rafe nodded, a flicker of hope in his shattered expression, and ran from the house. Luca, I said, my voice trembling, what are you... You can't just... Trade me? It was a stupid question, but the fear was suffocating. He moved, closing the distance between us in 2 steps. He gripped my arms, his hold tight, forcing me to look at him. Listen to me, he commanded, his eyes burning into mine. I do not trade, I do not negotiate, and I do not, ever, trade family. He said it with such finality, family. They have his sister, Luca, because of me. They have his sister because they are animals, he growled, and they made a mistake. They think this makes me weak. They think I will bargain. He let go of one of my arms, his hand going to my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I didn't know I'd shed. I am not bargaining, Camilla. I am going to war. You're going yourself? The terror shifted. It wasn't for me. It was for him. No. Send your men. You can't. What if... Rafe's sister. My right hand, my family. This is not a job I delegate. He kissed my forehead, a hard, brief press of his lips. Lock the doors. Do not open them for anyone. Not until you hear my voice. He turned to leave. The house was already filling with shadows. His men, his capos, arriving, their faces grim. I heard the sound of heavy bags being unzipped. The armory door was open. Luca, I cried out. He stopped in the doorway, his back to me. I ran to him, my heavy, pregnant body awkward. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to turn. I looked at the man who was putting on a lightweight vest of body armor over his dress shirt. You come back, I whispered, my voice fierce, my hands clutching the rough material of the vest. I always come back, he said, his face softening for just a second. No? I shook my head, my grip tightening. You promise me. No, that's not good enough. I didn't know what I was saying, only that I couldn't let him walk out that door. If you die, Luca, I will never, ever forgive you. My voice broke. You do not get to do this. You do not get to make me love you. You do not get to put this baby inside me. And then you do not get to leave. I swear to God, I will hate you forever if you leave me alone again. His eyes widened. He saw that I meant it. It was the most powerful weapon I had, not a plea, but a threat. He grabbed my face, his hands hard, and his mouth crashed down on mine. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was desperate, angry, and full of a terrible promise. It was a kiss that said, I will not be forgiven. He broke away, his breathing ragged. Lock the doors, he whispered. And then he was gone. I stood by the window in the living room, behind the reinforced glass, and watched them leave. Not just one car, a convoy. 5 black sedans filled with hard men, pulling out of the gates and vanishing into the Eastwick night. The mansion was silent. The hours that followed were the worst of my life. I paced. I sat in the nursery, my hand on the yellow wall. I tried to breathe. Every time a car backfired in the distance, I jumped, my heart seizing. Midnight came and went. 1 in the morning. 2 in the morning. I was in the kitchen, staring at a kettle that would not boil, when I heard the sound of cars on the gravel drive. I ran. I fumbled with the locks he had told me not to open, my hands shaking. I tore the heavy front door open just as the first car, its front end crumpled, rolled to a stop. Men spilled out. They were not the clean, pressed soldiers who had left. They were covered in dust and blood. "Where is he?" I screamed at the first man I saw. He just pointed back. The last car was pulling up. Rafe got out of the driver's side. He was crying, but he was smiling. He opened the back door. A young woman, wrapped in a blanket, fell out into his arms. Mia. She was alive. Then Rafe looked at me, and his smile faded. He moved to the passenger side. He opened the door. Luca didn't get out. "Boss," Rafe said, his voice gentle. "We're home. Camilla's here." I pushed past him. Luca was slumped in the seat, his head against the window. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was a ragged, dark crimson, soaked through on his left side. His eyes were closed. "Luca!" I screamed. I grabbed his hand. It was cold. His eyes flickered open. He groaned, a deep, animal sound. "Mila, told you. Lock the door." "Help me!" I yelled at Rafe. "Get him inside!" Between the two of us, we hauled him out of the car. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight. He screamed, a raw, sharp sound, when I put my arm around his waist, my hand pressing into the wet, sticky wound. We got him into the foyer, and he collapsed onto the marble floor. "Get the kit," he grunted, his eyes squeezed shut in pain. "Study, bottom drawer." Rafe ran. I knelt, my hands hovering, terrified. It's bad," I whispered, the metallic smell of his blood making me sick. "It's just a graze," he lied, his teeth gritted. Rafe returned with a black medical kit, the kind soldiers carry. He opened it. Gauze, antiseptic, sutures. I'll call Dr. Alistair," Rafe stammered. "No," Luca commanded, his voice weak but firm. "No hospitals. They'll report it. Castillo. He got away. It's not over. No doctors." "Then what do we do?" Rafe looked at the wound and then at me, helpless. "I can't. I'm not—" "Go," Luca said to him. "Take your sister. Get her. Get her safe. Out of the city. Go." "Boss, I'm not leaving you." "That is an order. Rafe, go!" Luca roared, a sound that ended in a wet cough. Rafe looked at Luca, then at me. He understood. He nodded, once. He left, closing the heavy door behind him, leaving us alone. "Camilla," Luca breathed, his hand finding mine. His grip was weak. The bottle. Antiseptic. I looked at the wound. It was a deep gash, torn along his ribs. It wasn't a bullet, a knife, or shrapnel. It was bleeding. A lot. "I can't," I whispered, the tears starting. "I can't. I don't know how." "You can." He fixed his eyes on mine. The boss was gone. He was just a man, bleeding on his floor. You're stronger than any of us. Clean it." I took a breath. I nodded. I was the girl who survived foster care. I was the girl who faced down a mafia boss. I could do this. I poured the antiseptic onto a pad of gauze. This is going to hurt. I know. I pressed the gauze to the wound. He didn't scream. He just arched off the floor, his body rigid, a strangled, tearing sound ripped from his throat. His hand crushed mine. I cleaned it. I cleaned the blood from his skin, my hands shaking, but my movements steady. I packed the wound with gauze, as tight as I could. "The tape," he gasped. his forehead beaded with sweat. I wrapped his ribs, pulling the tape tight, creating a pressure bandage. It was clumsy. It was ugly. But the bleeding slowed. I sat back on my heels, my hands covered in his blood. He was pale, shivering. I ran and grabbed a blanket from the sofa, covering him. "See?" he whispered, his eyes fluttering. "Just a graze." "You're an idiot," I sobbed, a hysterical laugh bubbling in my throat. I wiped his face with a clean cloth. He reached up, his hand weak and covered mine, pressing my bloody hand flat against my belly. Is he okay?" "We're okay," I whispered. "We're fine. You're the one." I stopped. Beneath my hand, beneath his, I felt it. Not a flutter, not a roll. A kick, a hard, sudden, definite kick, pushing back against his palm. Luca's eyes shot open, his head lifted off the floor. "What was that?" "That," I said, a tear rolling down my cheek, "was your son. I think he's as stubborn as you are." He stared at my belly, a look of such profound awe on his face that it broke my heart. He felt it again, another sharp thump. A slow, pained, beautiful smile spread across his face. He looked from my belly to my eyes. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." He was looking at his own blood on my hands, pressed against the new life inside me. And in that moment, the entire world shifted. "This is not the life, he said, his voice hoarse. This blood, this fear, it stops. With me." He held my gaze. "After he's born, Camilla, we're out. I'm done." "You mean it?" "I'm liquidating." He breathed, the pain and the promise mixing in his voice. "The docks, the shipping, all of it. I'm buying real estate, a logistics company. Something clean, something for him." He survived. The next few weeks, he healed, and he was true to his word. The mansion, once a war room, became a different kind of office. The men who came and went were not his capos. They were lawyers, accountants, men in suits who carried briefcases, not guns. He was on the phone constantly, but the words were acquisitions, escrow, diversify. He was dismantling his father's empire, piece by piece. I entered my 3rd trimester. I was heavy, and I was happy. The house was quiet. He was present. One morning, I was in the nursery, folding a tiny undershirt. He came and stood in the doorway, just watching me. "Marry me when?" he said. I turned. "What?" Not a thing," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Not a Moretti wedding. I don't want that. I want you to be my wife. I want this baby to have my name, our name, today." We went to the courthouse downtown. It was a sterile, beige room. The judge was a tired man who looked at us over his glasses, clearly not recognizing the most powerful man in the city. Our only witness was Rafe. Luca's hand was steady as he slid a simple, heavy gold band onto my finger. My hand was shaking as I did the same. We didn't have flowery vows. "I will," he said, his voice rough, his eyes never leaving mine. "I will," I whispered back. And just like that, I was Camilla Moretti. We went home. He told me he had a surprise for me. I assumed it was dinner or jewelry. I walked into the living room, and a woman was standing by the fireplace, her back to me. She was thin, with dark, wavy hair, just like mine. "Luca?" I said, confused. The woman turned around. My world stopped. I hadn't seen that face in 12 years, not since I was 13, in a foster home 2 counties over, before she was moved and I never saw her again. "Elena?" I whispered. "My sister. My estranged, lost sister." "Cammy?" she breathed, her hands flying to her mouth. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I've been looking for you," she cried, tears already streaming down her face. "For years. I couldn't find you. And then, last week, this man," she gestured at Luca, who was standing quietly by the door. This man shows up at my apartment in Chicago. He just found me. He flew me here. He said you were safe. He said you were waiting. He hadn't just been dismantling his empire. He'd been using his power, his resources, his reach, to find the only piece of my past I had ever mourned. He wasn't just giving me a future. He was healing my past. I ran to her. We collided, two halves of a whole, sobbing in the middle of a mafia boss's living room. I looked over her shoulder at Luca. He was watching us, his face soft, his eyes holding an emotion so deep, so profound, it stole my breath. It was love. Not the possessive, angry kind, not the desperate, broken kind. It was the healing, steady, patient kind. The final weeks were a blur of peace. Elena stayed with us. We painted. We laughed. I felt whole. I was 9 months pregnant. I was huge. I was tired. I woke up early one morning, the sun just a gray promise in the sky. A familiar ache tightened in my lower back. I smiled. A false alarm. I'd had them for weeks. I stood up from the bed. And another one came, harder, a wave of steel. So intense it stole my breath. I gripped the bedpost. Luca. I breathed. He was awake in an instant. What is it? False alarm. I don't think so, I panted. This one was real. And then my water broke. The panic in his eyes was almost comical. The man who had stormed a Castillo warehouse, the man who had calmly killed 2 intruders, looked at the small puddle on the floor and went completely white. Okay, he said, his voice high. Okay, the bag, the car, the hospital. He was running in circles, grabbing his shoes, grabbing my bag. Luca, calm down. I was laughing and crying. I am calm, he yelled, throwing on a shirt upside down. He wouldn't let Rafe drive. He wouldn't let anyone drive. He carried me to the car, his bad side twinging. But he didn't care. He drove through the empty morning streets of Eastwick like he was being chased, his hand gripping mine, his knuckles white. You're breathing too fast, Luca, I panted as another contraction seized me. I'm breathing fine. You breathe, the doctor said. Breathing, right? Breathe. We got to the hospital. My hospital. The one I had chosen. They put me in a wheelchair. They started to wheel me away. Sir, you'll have to wait here a nurse said. I'm not waiting here, Luca growled. I've got this, I told the nurse. I gripped his hand. Come on. The labor was hard. It was long. It was hours of a pain I could not have imagined. Luca never left my side. He held my hand. He wiped my face. He looked terrified and completely in awe. And then something went wrong. The doctor's face, so calm, suddenly became strained. The baby's heartbeat, the steady thump-thump on the monitor, suddenly dipped. It faltered. Dr. Alistair, a nurse said, her voice sharp. The cord, Alistair said, her voice tight. It's around the neck. We're losing him. We have to go. Now. Go, Luca said, his voice rising. Go where? We need to do an emergency C-section. Sir, you need to leave. Now. They were pushing a new bed in. They were moving me. It was chaos. Camilla! Luca's voice was panicked. It's okay, I cried, as they wheeled me toward the double doors of the operating room. I love you, Luca! No, Camilla. The doors swung shut, leaving him in the hallway. He stood there, stunned. The silence of the hallway roared in his ears. He looked at his hands. They were covered in my sweat. He saw a small, private alcove, a waiting room. There was a window and a small chapel. Luca Moretti, the man who had cursed God, the man who hadn't set foot in a church since his mother's funeral, walked into the chapel. He didn't kneel. He just stood in front of the small, simple cross. He slid down the wall, his billion-dollar suit rubbing against the cheap plaster. He put his head in his hands. And for the first time since he was 12 years old, he prayed, he begged, he bargained with a God he didn't believe in, offering his own life, his own soul, for hours. I do not remember a time of silence. My entire life, Even the quiet moments had been filled with noise, the rumble of my father's voice, the click of a gun's safety, the whisper of traitors, the roar of my own blood in my ears. But the silence outside the operating room was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was an absolute, suffocating void. It was the sound of my powerlessness. Luca Moretti, the man who controlled the docks, the unions, the entire Eastwick underworld, was useless. I was just a man in a beige hallway that smelled of bleach and fear, waiting for a stranger to decide my fate. I had left the chapel. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't bargain with a god I had forsaken. I was pacing. 10 steps toward the elevator. Turn. 10 steps toward the nurse's station. Turn. My suit was rumpled, my tie undone. I had her blood on my shirt cuff. My hands were shaking, the same hands that had cleaned a gun, that had signed death warrants, that had held another man's life in their grip. They were shaking so hard I had to clench them into fists. An hour, or maybe it was a lifetime. The double doors swung open. "Doctor." Alistair came out, pulling off her surgical mask. Her face was pale, lined with an exhaustion that mirrored my own. She looked not sad, just drained. I couldn't move. My feet were lead. I couldn't ask. She saw me, and her professional mask softened. "Mr. Moretti." "Is she—" I couldn't say the word. "Camilla is alive," she said, and my knees almost buckled. She was very strong, but it was close. Very close. She lost a lot of blood. We had to do a transfusion. But she's stable. She's in recovery. She's resting. I leaned against the wall, my forehead pressed to the cool, painted plaster. Alive. She was alive. I hadn't realized I'd stopped breathing. The baby," I managed to say, my voice a rasp. "The heartbeat, A small, tired smile touched the doctor's lips. "It's the 21st century. Mr. Moretti, we're very good at what we do. You have a daughter." I stared at her. A daughter. I had been so sure. A son. An heir. My father's voice in my head. A son to carry the name. A daughter. "She's premature," the doctor continued. "As we knew, 5 pounds, 6 ounces. But she's a fighter. Her lungs are strong. She's in the NICU. Just for observation, she's perfect." A daughter. A girl. Like my mother. "Can I—" You can see her, but you'll need to scrub in. And you," she said, eyeing my disheveled, bloody state, "need to change." I was in scrubs within 5 minutes. The NICU was another world. It was dim, filled with the soft, rhythmic beeping of machines. It was a room of tiny, plastic boxes, each one holding a miracle. A nurse, her voice a gentle whisper, led me to an incubator in the corner. "She's right here. Mr. Moretti. She's beautiful." I looked. She was tiny. So small she looked like she could break. Her skin was reddish, her face scrunched up. She was wrapped in a small white blanket, a tiny pink cap on her head, which was covered in a fuzz of dark, dark hair. "Can I hold her?" My voice was not my own. "Of course. Sit here." The nurse gently, expertly, scooped the tiny bundle from the plastic box and placed her in my arms. I was holding a life that weighed 5 pounds. A man of 200 pounds, a man who had lifted other men off the ground in anger, was terrified I would crush her. She was warm. She was impossibly light. I looked down at her, and the world just stopped. The noise in my head, the war with the Castillos, the Empire, the blood, my father's ghost, it all just evaporated. It was just her. Her tiny, scrunched-up face relaxed. Her eyes, still sealed, fluttered. She made a small, snuffling sound. I was trembling. My whole body. The breakdown I had been holding back, in the car, in the hallway, in the chapel. It finally came. A sob, silent and tearing, ripped through my chest, the tears I hadn't shed since I was 12 years old, at my mother's grave. Finally fell. They dripped from my chin onto her white blanket. She was so pure, so new. She was the only clean, good, perfect thing I had ever touched. I leaned my head down, my rough cheek next to her impossibly soft one. "I don't deserve you," I whispered, my voice breaking. You're everything I never deserved. I wasn't just a boss. I wasn't just a son. I was a father. And I would burn the world to the ground to keep her safe. I would rewrite my entire existence. I would become the man she deserved. I don't know how long I sat there, just holding her, watching her breathe. An hour, 2. "Mr. Moretti?" The nurse's voice was soft. "Your wife is awake. She's asking for you." "Camilla?" My heart hammered. I stood, my legs unsteady, holding my daughter as if she were a shield. Can I bring her? "For a few minutes, let's get her swaddled up." I walked out of the NICU, down the quiet gray hallway to her private room. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. She was lying in the bed. She looked small, pale. The defiant, strong woman who had stood up to me was gone, replaced by someone fragile. Her dark hair splayed out on the white pillow. An IV was taped to her hand. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were wide, alert, and filled with a raw, primal panic. "Luca?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. She looked at me. Then her hands went to her stomach, to the flat place where a life had been. The baby, where I saw her fear, the terror that it was all for nothing, that the heartbeat had stopped. I walked toward her, slowly. "It's okay, Camilla. Shh. It's okay. I've got her." I saw the moment her eyes focused on the bundle in my arms. Her entire body sagged in relief. The panic fled, replaced by the same look of awe I had felt. I sat on the edge of her bed, very carefully. She's a girl. Camila. We have a daughter." I placed the small, warm bundle in the crook of her arm. Camilla's hands came up, trembling, to touch her face. "Oh," she breathed. "It was a prayer. Oh, she's so little." 5 pounds, 6 ounces, I said, my voice thick, and perfect. Camilla was crying, silent tears of joy and exhaustion, her fingers tracing the baby's tiny eyebrow. She looked up, not at the baby, at me. She watched me as I watched them. She saw my face. She saw the tears I hadn't bothered to wipe away. She saw my hands, resting protectively on the blanket. She saw the man from the nursery, the man from his mother's grave. And for the first time since the night she'd poured my coffee, for the first time since she'd met my eyes in that diner, Camilla Moretti smiled at me. It was not a smile of fear. It was not a smile of truce. It was not a smile of sadness or shared brokenness. It was a real smile. It was full of light. It was a smile of peace. She was not afraid of me. In that moment, I knew I had already won. We named her Eleonora, after my mother, Ella. The promise I made to her, the one I made to Camila, became my singular focus. The man who had stormed the Castillo warehouse was done. The man who held his daughter for the first time was in charge. The day I brought them home from the hospital, I made my first call. "It's over," I told Rafe, who had been running things in my absence. "Boss, Castillo is in the wind. We need to—" I don't care about Castillo," I said, my voice flat. I was looking at Ella, asleep in her bassinet by our bed. "I'm done. I'm liquidating. All of it, the docks, the shipping, the unions. I want it all turned to cash, and I want it clean." "Luca, you can't just walk away. Your father's—" "My father is dead," I said, my voice cold, "and his world is dying with him. Sell it." It took 6 months. It was a different kind of war. One fought with contracts and lawyers. I was ruthless. I dissolved my father's holdings. I forced buyouts. I cut ties. I moved millions into legitimate, clean businesses, real estate, logistics, tech funds. I kept only one piece of the old world, my cousin, Marcus. He was a good earner, but he had the blood. He loved the noise. I met him at the old mansion, The stone fortress I now hated. It was empty. We were the only two there. "You're giving it to me," he said, his voice skeptical. "The Eastwick operation, just giving it." "I am," I said. I slid a set of keys and a ledger across the polished, dark wood of my father's desk. "It's yours, but my name is not associated. I am a ghost. You never knew me. We are done." He looked at me, at the man I had become. I wasn't wearing a suit. I was in jeans and a simple dark sweater. "She did this to you," he said, almost pityingly. I looked at him. A man I knew would be dead or in jail within 10 years. "No," I said. "She saved me." I walked out of my father's house and never looked back. We moved, not to Sicily, not to Switzerland. We moved to a coastal town in Oregon, a place where the fog rolled in every morning and the air smelled of salt and pine. We were not the Morettis. I was Leo, she was Cara, our daughter was Ella. Our house was not a fortress. It was made of wood and glass, perched on a cliff overlooking the gray, churning Pacific. It had no gates. It had no guards. It had a porch swing and a small, wild garden. Life became quiet. I learned a new set of skills. I learned to make coffee that wasn't black and bitter. I learned to change a diaper. I learned to assemble a high chair, a task that proved more complicated than any weapon I had ever handled. I learned to walk on the beach with my daughter on my shoulders, her small hands tangled in my hair, her laughter mixing with the sound of the gulls. I learned to live without the armor. I learned to sleep through the night. Camilla healed. The fear left her eyes. The pale, haunted girl from the diner was gone. In her place was a woman who laughed, who painted, who argued with me about what to plant in the garden. She was vibrant. She was whole. We were happy. It was a simple but profound happiness that I hadn't known was possible. Our daughter was almost 2. She was a whirlwind of dark hair and my stubbornness. She was running through the house, a house filled with light and her toys. I was in the small office I'd built, unpacking the very last box from Eastwick. It was a box of personal effects I'd had Rafe ship, things from my study I hadn't wanted to leave or look at. At the bottom, under old photos of my mother, I found it. The small, clear Ziploc bag. Inside it, the charred, black, melted lump of plastic. I took it out. I stood there, in the sunlight streaming in from the ocean, holding the ashes of our beginning. I could still just make out the letters, Tiv. "What is that?" I turned. Camilla was standing in the doorway, holding Ella on her hip. I held it up. "Our future," I said. She smiled, her eyes soft. "You kept it." "I kept it," I confirmed. "It's the most important thing I own." I put my hand back in the box and pulled out the other thing I had saved, a tiny plastic hospital bracelet, white with her name printed on it in small, black letters, Moretti, Eleonora. I didn't say anything. I just went to the hall closet and found the deep, shadow box frame I had bought a month ago for this exact purpose. I sat on the floor, my daughter playing at my feet. Camilla sat across from me. I laid a piece of black velvet inside the frame. I took the charred, ugly piece of plastic, the symbol of her terror, of my past, and I placed it in the center. Below it, I placed the tiny, perfect circle of the hospital bracelet, the symbol of our future. I put the glass on, the ashes and the new life, side by side, our whole story, in one frame. I hung it on the wall in our hallway, not a trophy, a reminder. Time moved on. The piece held. I was walking up the path from the beach, the sand cold on my bare feet. The sun was low, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. I saw her. She was standing on the porch, watching the water. Our daughter, now 4 years old, was running in circles on the wet sand, screaming in delight as she chased the gulls. Camilla was watching her, one hand resting on her own stomach, a soft, round swell that had become familiar again. Our second child, our son, this one a choice, a celebration. I came up the steps and she turned, smiling. I came up behind her, wrapping my arms around her, my hands covering hers on her belly. She leaned her head back against my chest. We stood there, together, watching our daughter run. The air was cool, and the sound of the ocean was the only noise. I was safe. She was safe. Our family was safe. She thought she had burned away the future, but he saw it in ashes and rebuilt it with love. Thank you so much for listening to our story. I hope it found you well. We and the entire team at Mafia Romance Stories are so grateful you spent this time with us. We would love to know where you're listening from. Please, drop a comment below and tell us what city or what country you're tuning in from. If you enjoyed this story and you want to hear more just like it, please consider subscribing to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories. And finally, share your thoughts in English. What was your favorite part of Camilla and Luca's journey? We read every comment and we can't wait to hear from you. Until next time.